Hello, I'm John Barron, and as a journalist and author, I've been covering US elections for more than a quarter of a century.
And I'm Chaz Dello, a person with no relevant qualifications whatsoever, except I'm a massive nerd.
But we are about to do something a little unusual. Planet America is a news show.
It's kind of not a news show, really.
Well, we are going to be covering the lead up to this year's election in America all year on ABC TV and the ABC News channel.
And we're not Adam Hills. I hope you realise that by now, or this would all be very confusing. Anyway, let's roll.
Whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
I did not have sex with her.
You have an absolutely perfect phone call.
Hello and welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
I'm Chaz Dello.
For the first time in history, an election is underway while the president is being impeached.
Our special guest, former Republican Senator Jeff Flake. Not a big fan of Trump, but does he want him removed from office?
We'll also take a look at the weird way America picks its presidential candidates.
And are all these polls just garbage? We'll try and find out.
But first, what began with a member of the intelligence community raising concerns over a phone call between President Trump and Ukraine's President Zelensky has seen Donald Trump become the third president ever to be impeached, and earlier today, the Senate trial began. During that now infamous July 2019 call, the new Ukrainian president was keen to arrange an Oval Office meeting and buy American anti-tank missiles. He did not yet know that Trump was withholding $380 million in US military aid. But Trump clearly wanted something from him.
I would like you to do us a favor, though. There's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. I'll have Mr. Giuliani give you a call, and we'll get to the bottom of it.
It didn't take long for the Ukrainians to realise the money was being held up. It was a potentially illegal quid pro quo. The US president wanted a foreign power to announce an investigation into his political rival. President Trump maintained, though, there was nothing wrong with his call.
My call was perfect.
The president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, first denied the claims.
Did you ask the Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden?
No, actually I didn't.
Then, moments later, he admitted it.
So you did ask Ukraine to look into Joe Biden?
Of course I did.
And in case there was any doubt, the president went even further.
So I would say that President Zelensky, if it were me, I would recommend that they start an investigation into the Bidens.
And in case there was still any doubt, the president's acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, said,
We do that all the time with foreign policy.
In late December, the president was impeached for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress by the Democrat-majority House of Representatives.
He will be held accountable. He has been held accountable. He has been impeached. He's been impeached forever.
But for Trump to be removed from office following his impeachment, 2/3 of the 100 US senators need to vote to convict him. There are just 47 Democrat votes and seemingly no chance that 20 Republicans are going to turn on their president, Chaz.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. Although there have been some bumps in the road for the president, like, for instance, last week when the Government Accountability Office found the Trump administration broke the law when they withheld military aid from Ukraine. The GAO stated that Congress holds the power of the purse and the president doesn't have the power to ignore what Congress wants to do with spending. Now, remember, Trump has openly admitted to asking for a hold on the aid. He said it was to crack down on corruption, amongst other reasons, but the GAO said that even if that was the case, the law doesn't allow the president to substitute his own policy priorities for the will of Congress. And this is important for a few reasons. Firstly, because one of Trump's prime defences in the trial is that he didn't break any laws. Well, this independent body is saying he did. Secondly, the hold was implemented in the dodgiest possible way. They buried away in some redacted documents that Trump personally ordered the hold. And then an official told the Pentagon, I appreciate your keeping that information closely held to those who need to know. In other words, in fact, the whole thing was so dodged that 2 White House officials apparently resigned, at least partly, over their concerns about the process. But having said that, the GAO is a congressional office. It's not a body with any legal authority here. They're simply expressing their opinion, which you'll be astounded to hear the White House disagrees with. And even in the very law that the White House supposedly broke, it says that breaking this law would merely result in a civil action, i.e. you can sue the president if you like. It's not a massive deal. So, as always with Trump controversies, people will take what they want out of it.
Yeah, they sure will. Well, up until now, of course, the Democrats have been basically calling the shots. They used their House majority to investigate the whole Ukraine affair, embark on the formal impeachment process, and then vote late last year to impeach the president. All without a single Republican vote. But Republicans hold the Senate majority, so it is now up to them, not just to determine the president's fate, but also to determine how the trial is going to take place, including a vote about whether witnesses will be allowed to appear. Democrats argue that more evidence has come to light since the House impeached President Trump, and the White House did block some witnesses and ignored a bunch of subpoenas. And there is also the possibility, Chaz, that the Republicans could call witnesses that Democrats may not want to appear, like, say, Joe Biden or his son Hunter.
Yeah, House impeachment manager Adam Schiff argued today that the witnesses and documents that the president blocked should be subpoenaed right now, whereas the Senate's proposed rules state that they'll have that fight after several days of opening statements. Schiff says that's a mistake.
That is the trial that they contemplate. The opening statements are the trial. So to say, let's just have the opening statements and then we'll see, means let's have the trial. And maybe we can just sweep this all under the rug.
But that argument was rejected today in a vote along party lines. That does not mean, though, that the Republicans made no concessions, because those opening statements that Adam Schiff referred to were originally supposed to go for 24 hours aside, spread over 2 days each. And Mitch McConnell has already allowed that to be extended to 3 days each. Now, you might think that's pretty trivial. Stay with me now. The reason that matters, though, is because if you look at the calendar, Trump's big State of the Union speech is in exactly 2 weeks. And Republicans have been trying to rush this trial to be over by then. But if we give the Democrats and Republicans 3 days each to make their case, and then they have 2 days of questions from senators and a day of arguing about extra witnesses like is currently scheduled, that leaves them only 3 more days to deal with all the processes and arguments and closing statements before the State of the Union. And these senators are very good at wasting time. So that basically means if they call any extra witnesses at all, that could well push the trial past the State of the Union, and Trump's State of the Union speech might become a fight to keep his job, which in true Trump style would be absolutely huge.
And even huger because it's going to be the day after the Iowa caucus with 5 presidential candidates sitting there watching him in Congress. It is going to be a great show. Now, Jeff Flake is a former senator and congressman from the great state of Arizona, who until his retirement just 1 year ago was one of the very few Republicans to openly criticise President Trump.
An American president who cannot take criticism, who must constantly deflect and distort and distract, who must find someone else to blame, is charting a very dangerous path.
Senator Flake is in Australia as a guest of the United States Study Centre, and he joined us here in the Oval Office. Donald Trump, he's been impeached. He's now going on trial in the Senate. Right. Does he deserve to be convicted and removed from office based on what you've seen around this whole Ukraine scandal?
Well, the Constitution gives Congress the sole authority to bring impeachment charges and then to remove the president. It doesn't require that the Congress do this. I think the president has committed what could be impeachable offenses. But I hope that he's not removed by the Senate. I want him removed from office by the voters later this year.
Is there anything that he could have done? Is it just that the Ukraine stuff isn't quite there? Yeah. Or is there anything that he could do that you think should have him removed?
Oh, certainly. There's always something. You always have to consider that something might happen between now and the election that would rise to the level of impeachment. But, you know, this is a big step. I don't want to get in a cycle where we try to remove presidents between elections rather than during elections. And it's just not a good cycle to be in. And I fear that we're close to being there. And if he were removed by the Senate, we would be in that cycle.
Senator, you just said that Trump may well have committed an impeachable offence, but that doesn't mean he should be impeached.
Right.
When do you think a president should be impeached?
Well, the Constitution, it's pretty nebulous on that. High crimes and misdemeanors. Obviously, bribery and some things are specifically mentioned. But it's left up to the Congress. Ultimately, it's pretty much a political decision. But having said that, the judiciary has responded, I think, appropriately. And the president ought to thank his lucky stars for what he calls the deep state. Bureaucrats who are in the so-called establishment who, push back. And that's been a frequent occurrence. The White House counsel, when the president wanted to fire the attorney general, said, no, if you force me to do it, I'll resign. The president backed off. A number of cases that's been the case, and frankly, it saved the president from what probably would have been really impeachable.
Your former colleagues, Republican colleagues in the Senate, seem to concur with you. What he did may not have been great, but we don't want to be removing him from office, particularly not at the start of an election year. When President Clinton was impeached but acquitted by the Senate in 1998-99, he was in his second term, couldn't stand again. Nixon resigned in his second term. Andrew Johnson wasn't re-nominated. This will potentially, therefore, be the first time an impeached president runs for re-election. What impact do you think that will have on Donald Trump?
That's a great question. I do think that it bolsters his chances. I don't think it'll be enough, but I do think it helps him politically. And that's one thing you consider. If this is a political decision, if it's a fine line between what is impeachable and what is not, then I think if you're in the House or the Senate, you consider, does this action that I'm taking increase the political longevity of the accused? And in this case, it well might. And so I think that's another reason that Nancy Pelosi was right in her first inclination to hold back and not do this.
And we'll have plenty more from Senator Jeff Flake on Planet America's Fireside Chat this Friday at 8 o'clock Eastern Time on the ABC News Channel and iView, including his very personal reasons for not running for president this year against Donald Trump.
My wife marks our time in office, or out of office, I'm sorry, now a year. In weeks, then months, now a year without death threats. And it's a tough time.
Were there a lot?
Oh, yeah. Just a few months ago, 2 people were sentenced. The person who sent the pipe bomb to some of the media personalities and some Democrats had tweeted an aerial photo of my home in Arizona saying, "There are a lot of entrances, I'll see you soon." So no, that's, and I'm not saying that's the reason that keeps people out, but it's a lot to ask of a candidate and a family to go out there, particularly when you know where the base of the Republican Party is right now. They are with the president. And if the president wants this nomination, he's going to get it. So I think people feel that they can still speak out and whatnot, but if the president wants the nomination, he's going to get it.
Yeah, well worth a watch. But next, we talk 2020 after this.
Out of context at the Democratic debate, Elizabeth Warren searches high and low for her Native American ancestry.
I've been to Afghanistan, to Iraq, to Jordan, to South Korea. I've been to lots of places.
Bernie Sanders fails to allay concerns about his age.
I am sick and tired.
And Joe Biden has harsh words for Joe Biden.
Joe Biden is a rabid dog. He should be beaten to death with a stick.
This has been the Democratic presidential debate.
It's been a good debate.
In less than 2 weeks, the first votes will be cast in the long and complicated process to elect America's next president or re-elect the current one.
Yeah, after 10 months and hundreds of millions of votes, this guy...
I don't know what I said. I don't remember.
Could well stay president for another 4 years. That's an oldie but a goodie.
Oh, I love it. Now, we don't know, of course, exactly what's going to happen over the next year, but we will be here to try and explain things along the way. To be President of the United States, you need to be at least 35 years old, a natural-born US citizen and a US resident for at least 14 years. And for about 150 years, you've also had to be the nominee of one of the 2 major political parties, the Republicans or the Democrats, to have a real chance of winning.
Thank you.
In the old days, presidential candidates were picked by party bosses, mostly old white guys in smoke-filled back rooms.
We call those the good old days.
But since the arrival of television, candidates have been able to go straight to the voters via the airwaves.
I don't want the talents of any American to go to waste.
Now, primary and caucus elections are held in every state and territory over about 5 months. Delegates are allocated depending on how many votes a candidate gets. Get the majority of delegates and you win the nomination.
Reporting for duty.
In 2020, for Democrats like Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, it's all about 1990.
You can't touch this. Yeah, that's how we living in your...
A different 1990. It's the majority of the 3,979 delegates. If nobody gets to 1990 votes in the first ballot at the Democratic Convention in Milwaukee in July, there's a second round of voting, including around 760 so-called superdelegates.
Yes, it's Superman, strange visitor from another planet who came to Earth with powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men.
Again, not really, but those super delegates are basically the party bosses without the smoke-filled back room.
You don't get rid of us that easily.
And those delegates keep on voting until they have a presidential nominee.
That brings delegates to their feet all over the floor.
There hasn't been that kind of contested convention with several ballots since the 50s, but it could happen to the Democrats this year. Meanwhile, Donald Trump also has to stand for his Republican Party's nomination again, although his rivals, Bill Weld and Joe Walsh, have hardly any support right now. So, November's presidential election is probably going to be between President Trump and whoever the Democrats nominate. And next week, we'll look at why Iowa gets to vote first and have such a big say in who gets to be president. OK, let's take a look at the state of the race. Former Vice President Joe Biden continues to lead in the average of national polls. He's 8 points in front of Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders. He has opened a 5-point margin over fellow Progressive Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. It's a tight race nationally for fourth, with the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Pete Buttigieg, just in front of the big spending billionaire, former New York City Mayor Mike Bloomberg. Then comes entrepreneur Andrew Yang, Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, and the other billionaire businessman in the pack, Tom Steyer, followed by Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard and Colorado Senator Michael Bennet. Joe Biden is also looking a bit stronger these days in first to vote Iowa, almost 4 points in front in the average of Iowa polls. Democratic candidates have been basically living in that Hawkeye state for months now. Not that you could tell from last week's debate there.
Iowa.
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 Iowans.
Iowa. And thank you for bringing up Iowa, Brianne, since that is where we are.
You know, I think Amy Klobuchar wants to win Iowa.
Yeah, I think they all do. There is some evidence, though, that Amy Klobuchar is gaining a bit of ground in Iowa, cracking 11% for the first time this week in a poll from Focus on Rural America. In that poll, Biden has regained his lead over Elizabeth Warren. Buttigieg is up, so is Bernie from a terrible FRA poll last time for Bernie. Some have suggested that this poll could be undersampling younger voters, disadvantaging Bernie, but that poll potentially has some bad news for the Vermont senator. At the Iowa caucuses, if your first choice candidate doesn't reach a viability threshold of 15% at a particular caucus site, you can either go home as a voter or vote for another candidate instead. So it's kind of a preferential voting system. Second choices, therefore, are very important, particularly if your first choice is someone like, say, Andrew Yang or Tom Steyer, who gets eliminated. Biden, Buttigieg and Warren get the most second picks in this poll. But look at Bernie Sanders there, just 6%. Now, that suggests that he has polarised voters and doesn't have as much room to grow as some other candidates.
Mind you, I'd prefer to be Sanders than Buttigieg at the moment. He's continuing to seriously struggle with the black vote. Bear in mind now, 25% of Democrat primary voters are black, so you cannot win the nomination without them. In fact, Biden's greatest strength is the 48% of support he receives from black people. Sanders is also doing well on 20%, but down the bottom there is Buttigieg on 2%. Below even Michael Bloomberg, a guy who's best known for implementing a stop and frisk policy when he was mayor of New York. Police would conduct spot searches on suspicious-looking people who often seem to be black, and this is how Bloomberg responded to criticism of the policy at the time.
In New York City, the vast majority of people stopped, questioned, and frisked are black and Latino. But the mayor today said that's not enough.
In that case, incidentally, I think we disproportionately stop whites too much and minorities too little.
That is the guy who has twice as much support as Pete Buttigieg does amongst black people. By the way, Bloomberg isn't competing in Iowa, or any of the first 4 states for that matter, but he's just sitting there waiting to meet whoever survives that first month of primaries, like one of those big bosses at the end of a gaming level, just like that. Bloomberg's already put together a staff of over 1,000 on his campaign, and as for spending on ads, look at this. This is total TV, radio and digital spending as of a week ago. And Trump was comfortably outspending all the major Democratic candidates, but then billionaire Tom Steyer got involved, and now Bloomberg is making Steyer look like a tightwad. In fact, Bloomberg is spending so much on ads that he is literally squeezing the available airtime for other campaigns, causing TV stations to raise their prices for other ads. For example, he single-handedly spiked the cost of ads in Houston by 45%.
He says as well that he's going to keep on spending to defeat Trump, even if he's not the nominee. But just how popular is Donald Trump right now anyway? According to the average of polls from 538.com, President Trump has an approval rating of 42.3%, while 53% disapprove of the job he is doing. Although last Friday, President Trump sent out this tweet.
Thank you. Hashtag MAGA. 51% approval rating.
And that was actually the first time that Trump has been above 50% approval in any poll since last September, and that was also a poll from Rasmussen.
Yeah, I wouldn't rely too heavily on Rasmussen polling. While it is true they got Hillary's popular vote margin about right in 2016, in 2018 they were the least accurate of all the pollsters, getting the final result wrong by about 10 points. They tend to be very pro-Trump as well, which might be the reason why Trump has tweeted out Rasmussen poll numbers no less than 22 times since he started running for president. But there are good reasons why pollsters disagree with each other. Firstly, polling is getting harder. Pew's response rates, for example, over the last 22 years have dropped from 36% all the way down to 6%. A number of robocalls out there have been wearing people down. They don't answer their phone anymore, and this compromises poll accuracy. Also, when you see opinion polls, you often see this phrase here, among likely voters. Remember, in America, only about half the people actually vote, so it's only their opinions that count for polls, and there is no magic formula for working out whether someone is actually likely to vote. Gallup, for example, asks questions like whether you know whether your voting location is, whether you voted in the last election, and how closely you're following the election. But every pollster's got their own method, and that's going to affect who the pollster speaks to. Most importantly though, even if the pollsters all have exactly the same data from speaking to exactly the same people, they crunch the numbers differently from each other to compensate for any flaws in their sample. Pew polling, for instance, tweaked their results according to gender by age, gender by education, age by education, region, race and Hispanic origin, whether they were born in America, and the population density of where they live. And the result of all that tweaking is that when the New York Times gave 4 good pollsters the same exact data in 2016, they came up with 4 different results. Everything from Clinton leading by 4 to Trump leading by 1. So what are you going to do with all this garbage? Well, firstly, you need to know how good your pollster is. Poll Analyst 538 have a page that you can check where they rate pollsters by their methodology, their transparency, and their results. Importantly, you want someone who's rated B or higher. Rasmussen's rated C+. How about that? Finally, don't look at individual polls anyway. Look at polling averages. Real Clear Politics has a section where they average out the most recent polls. You can check that out. 538 also average recent polls, except they then crunch the numbers and add a lot of detail. And I mean a lot of detail. Yeah, a lot of detail. It's very Stephen Hawking. Guys, you're just showing off now. Cut.
Since our last show, we've seen a few more presidential candidates dropping out of the race. So it is time once again to play
Guess Who Won't Be President?
Yes, at one point, all these people were running for president and were extremely deluded, but then some of them became less deluded.
And then, over the holidays, former San Antonio Mayor Julian Castro, the only Latino running for president, also dropped out.
Which was a shame, because I only just worked out which of the Castro twins was running for president.
It wasn't that easy, actually, because Joaquin Castro was not just Julian Castro Castro's twin, but also his campaign manager. They tried wearing different ties, then Joaquin grew a beard.
I think that means he's the evil twin.
Yeah, and then they tried to explain it on TikTok.
Wait, stop, this doesn't make sense. Hold up, wait, who are you? I am you. I am me. No, sir, you are you. Wait, I don't know. 2 is 2. I say you are you, but you say you're me.
Oh, can you drop out again?
I'm amazed that didn't work. Julian Castro has now endorsed Elizabeth Warren and is campaigning for her in Iowa.
Or is he?
Actually, it could be either, because Joaquin Castro has also endorsed Elizabeth Warren. Julian Castro, of course, served in the Obama administration as well as being a former mayor. He looked good on paper. As the only Latino in the race, he stood out on the issue of illegal immigration, but he never broke out of that bottom tier of 1%ers, and he struggled for money as a result.
Well, he's presumably hoping Warren will pick him for vice president, given she's an old white lady, and he's not. Talking about old white ladies, though, Marianne Williamson.
Yes, Oprah's one-time lifestyle guru has also dropped out of the presidential race after a few attention-grabbing moments in the debates.
You have harnessed fear for political purposes, and only love can cast that out. So sir, I have a feeling you know what you're doing. I'm going to harness love for political purposes. I will meet you on that field, and sir, love will win.
Well, it turns out love lost. I'm not sure that was the greatest strategy.
My strategy is not strategy. My strategy is that I seek to speak as deeply, articulately, and passionately as I can.
Well, she makes a very articulate little point, but I did feel a little sorry for her, to be honest. Everyone treated her like she was a complete joke, and yes, she was, but so was half the field, so why only treat her like that?
Yeah, I mean, she was, in a way, the most ridiculous candidate since another TV star ran for president, one Donald J. Trump. Maybe her mistake was trying to appeal to love rather than anger. And then, of course, there was Senator Cory Booker, whose campaign showed some early promise as well, but never really took off. He tried to strike a positive tone, talked about love as well, and he also took some good-natured swipes at Joe Biden on issues like criminal justice reform.
Mr. Vice President, there's a saying in my community, you're dipping into the Kool-Aid and you don't even know the flavor.
To some, he was the next Obama, but after briefly hitting 5% in the polls early on in his campaign last year, he was overshadowed first by Senator Kamala Harris, who's also dropped out now, and then by another fellow Rhodes Scholar, Pete Buttigieg. He was doing a lot of organising in Iowa. Booker could have sprung a surprise, but he basically ran out of cash late last year.
Yeah, he ticked every box except for the people actually supporting me box, and now he's gone. There have been a few people noticing the lack of diversity in the Democratic field. But I think people are missing the point. 2 of those recent African-American dropouts were 2 of only 3 current African-American senators out of 100. And the one African-American governor in the race is one of 2 African-American governors for the last 100 years. The problem isn't black people in the Democratic field, it's black people in politics. If there were 10 times as many black people in positions of power, there'd be more to select from as presidential contenders. That's what I think, at least. But talking about the disadvantage, being poor can affect more than just your wallet. Take this graph here. Each of these marks represents 1 percentile of household income. So obviously there is 100 of them. This is the bottom 1%, and this is the top 1%. And we have 2 of these curves, one for men, one for women. Now what these curves are showing you here is your life expectancy if you're a 40-year-old in these income brackets. So, if you're a woman in the bottom 1%, you can expect to live until the age of 78. And if you're a woman in the top 1%, you can expect to live until the age of 88. That is 10 years difference of living, depending only on your income. But what about the men? Well, the bottom 1% of men can expect to live until they are 72. And the top 1% of men can expect to live until the age of 87. That is 15 years difference in life expectancy based on only one factor, your income at the age of 40. So it turns out income inequality could be a matter of life or death. Which leads us to this week's Best and Worst segment. The highest life expectancy in America belongs to northeastern Chatham County in New Hampshire, where they can expect to live for an average of 97 years. Whereas the lowest life expectancy belongs to the very poor and very Native American town of Stillwell, Oklahoma, where they can expect to live about 56 years. So if Stilwell was a whole country, it'd be just ahead of Somalia, with the 9th lowest life expectancy on Earth. Yikes.
And that is it for tonight, but we will be back on Friday at 8 o'clock Eastern Time on ABC News and iView for a fireside chat.
Yep, we're going to be going into a whole lot more detail about that impeachment trial, more from Jeff Flake.
Yes, and our guest next Wednesday night, former presidential candidate and Democratic Party boss, Howard Dean. Yeah!
See ya.